Okay, in Chapter 9, I also want to talk to you about the relationship between confidence intervals and significance tests. Remember that in Chapter 8, we were doing confidence intervals, and we would say like creating 95% confidence interval, and we would draw a picture really similar to this, 95 in the center, 2.5% on either side. So how do they relate? Well, these would be the border lines where once the probability becomes less than that amount, then we would be rejecting the null hypothesis. And if it was greater than this amount over here, we would be rejecting the null hypothesis. So if it was a not equals, then not equals would be the 5% of the alpha level. So that would be where our 0.05% of the alpha level goes. Okay, so let's look at that as another problem. So let's say, again, starting at confidence interval, I start here, I say that this is a 90%. So if this is a 90% and this is a 90%, right? Then we know we have 10% left. This is 0.5, this is 0.5. Okay, so if our probability was less than this in our alternative, we would have rejected the null hypothesis right here. And if our probability was greater than this in our alternative hypothesis, we would have rejected the null hypothesis, right? So these would have been our rejection areas, basically. So a 90% confidence interval relates to the remaining 10%, but only if you're doing the not equals part, right? So where we add up both sections, both this section and this section. Okay, so going backwards is a little bit more difficult. So if I were going to start with the alpha levels first, so let's say that they told me that my alpha level was equal to 10%. That I was checking something against. And let's say that the alternative hypothesis was that we were looking at something where it was a less than of something. So then I want to make sure that I'm drawing it with a 10% down here. That means we're going to have an imaginary balance on the other side of another 10%. And this would be a 80% confidence interval that would go with it. Had they said that the alpha level was a 10 and it was a not equals, then I would have to split the 10 between the two sides and it would look like the one we had just done before. Let's do one more, starting with alpha level, going the other way. All right, so if I am starting with an alpha level of, let's do 1%. Okay, and let's say that our alternative was a p is greater than. Okay, so then we would draw this, we'd put the 1% down over here. We would want to match it over here with another 1%. That would leave us 98% in the middle. So this would be a 98% confidence interval, even though I'm really only looking at this part of it when I am doing a significance test. If the alpha level was a 1% and it was a two-sided, that means both sections, so this would be the alternative where p is not equal, both sections have to add up to 0.01, so this has to be 0.005, this has to be 0.005, and now this is a 99% confidence interval. Cool. So that's how they relate to each other. These bars that we're drawing that have the low percentages, that's where we would switch our decision of rejecting versus failing to reject.